Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome and thanks to you and the 200 plus others for joining us this afternoon to consider and discuss the Learning and Work Institute research report entitled A Higher Skills Ambition for Northern Ireland, Skills for Growth and Social Inclusion. You're most welcome to what I'm sure will be a thought-provoking couple of hours, and you will see the programme on screen. You will already have had details of the agenda and the programme sent to you by the Learning and Work Institute this morning. After these few words of welcome, we'll then consider the detailed findings of the research, and I would like to plead with you to use the chat function to make comment, ask questions, and to engage for the next few hours. We then move on after the presentation of the research to our expert panel to consider three key issues flowing from the research: ensuring our skills strategy delivers social inclusion, as well as meeting skills imbalances, which of course it has to do. Secondly, ensuring alignment across education to meet learner and community needs. In effect, what would a learning and skills ecosystem that is coherent and learner-centred look like in Northern Ireland? And then thirdly, how do we ensure that alignment across education to meet learner and community needs, and the collaboration that will be required to bring that about. We are delighted to have, in addition to the expert panel, the head of skills division within the Department of the Economy and the chair of the Assembly Economy Committee to respond to what they will have heard and tell us about their plans to take learning and skills forward within the province. Again, please engage and ask questions and comment. This is a real opportunity for influence, and I hope you use that. We also hope to use polling questions over the next couple of hours, three polls. And then after this debate and question and answer session, we'll finish the event with the launch of our OCNNI 2021 Learning Endeavour Awards. My name is Paul Donaghy, and I'm leading on this work for the Open College Network, and I'll be your chairperson for this afternoon. Before I retired, I spent most of my life in the world of workplace and second chance learning and in health and social care leadership and learning. Indeed, I've been around long enough to remember when Northern Ireland last had a lifelong learning strategy over 20 years ago. We certainly live in a very changed world. Learning and skills have never been more important. And most of us are now familiar with Zoom and Teams. So I'm hoping that today's technology will enable you to engage as the event unfolds. We have a Twitter account at hashtag Higher Skills Ambition Northern Ireland. We'll also be recording the event and making it available on YouTube for people to watch back or to share. We brought together key decision makers and thinkers, so please use the opportunity that today provides. I shortly move to our first presentation, but I'm conscious that some of our attendees from Great Britain, the Republic of Ireland, and further afield may not know who OCNNI is or why we commissioned the research. So before I ask the Learning and Work Institute to share the research findings, I want to briefly answer both questions. Next slide, please, Minta. Who are we? Well, we are a not-for-profit education charity. We're regulated by Ofqual and SEA regulation to award vocational qualifications. We are a bit different, mind you. Our mission is on the screen, and it's about developing and awarding qualifications which engage, enrich, and equip learners for life. Our vision is a vision of a successful, inclusive society where every learner matters. And we have a specific remit to suppose those traditionally left behind. We're now, I'm glad to say, the largest provider of vocational qualifications in Northern Ireland, and have had over 500,000 of our people enrolling in Open College Network programmes. Why we commissioned the report? Well, our role, our experience and our expertise, because of that, we know how the right learning at the right time is life-changing. Our Learning Endeavour Awards evidence how learning can be transformational. We know how learning can help ordinary people achieve extraordinary things and can improve the lives not only of them as individuals, but their families and our community. We experience daily the life-changing power of learning, its contribution to increased and better employment opportunities, improved productivity, increased income, and a reduction in health and social inequality in our society. And these issues need more than ever to be at the heart of our skills strategy and our programme for government, as they are the tools to help us achieve a more healthy, wealthy, and wise Northern Ireland. And surely that needs to be the goal for all of us. I now want to move to the real business of the afternoon, and so pass over to the Learning and Work Institute and ask Stephen Evans, Chief Executive of the Learning and Work Institute, and David to introduce the research, share the findings. And I would just like to say it's been a real pleasure to work with the Learning and Work Institute on this piece of research. So over to you, Stephen, and your team.
Great, thank you, Paul. And yeah, it has been a pleasure working with you and the team there on this project, and more generally on how we can improve access to learning and skills. Just very briefly, for those of you that might not be fully aware of the Learning and Work Institute, so this is actually our centenary year, so we've been around for 100 years this year in various forms, and we work across the UK, but also in partnership with various people in various other countries as well, across the full field of learning, skills and employment policy and practice. So everything to do with adults and labour markets and lifelong learning and adult education more generally. If we can move on to the next slide, please, and then we'll kind of get into some of the sort of reason why we did this project, and then I'll pass across to David to take us through the findings. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So Paul said a little bit about this. I mean, the reason for doing this project was to try and really sort of bring together and set out the evidence for how learning and skills can affect and can drive economic growth and social inclusion. I suspect most of the people on this event would probably agree that learning and skills are really important to that, but I think it's really important to gather together that evidence and then to think about how that persuades policymakers and stakeholders and others. And then I guess the real meat of it was to say, well, what might Northern Ireland's qualifications and skills profile look like by 2030 on current trends? So trying to project forward from where we are now to 2030, so 10 years or so, and then compare that to similar projections for the whole of the UK, and also for a number of international comparators, so a number of OECD countries, including Ireland. So we kind of got a picture about where Northern Ireland compares on various different forms of skills and qualifications, and there's no perfect measure of learning or skills or qualifications, and you can kind of pick any one you want, and whichever one you want probably doesn't tell you everything you want to know, but we try to look at what's available and what's the best that's out there. So we kind of know a bit about where we are now, how that compares to other countries, but actually what will that look like by 2030? And then at the risk of sort of giving away the results, we think there's a very clear case for setting a higher ambition for learning and skills in Northern Ireland, for economic growth and social inclusion reasons. So we were trying to draw together some recommendations as well, and it'd be good to debate that with the panel and those of you. I can see loads of questions already coming in, so that's great as well. So that's kind of what we were trying to do. So if we move on to the next slide, just bit of context. So you will all kind of know most of this, and we could probably phrase this a bit more positively about the opportunity to improve these things. But there's a kind of, I think economic growth has been pretty rubbish in the UK as a whole, but also weaker within Northern Ireland, and specifically with a quite large productivity gap. So as we get through this current crisis, how do we boost growth? How do we accelerate prosperity in Northern Ireland? Employment. You know, we entered this current crisis with lower employment rates in Northern Ireland than in the UK as a whole, and particularly sort of relatively high levels of economic inactivity. And then we've had quite sharp changes during the coronavirus crisis, with the number of people claiming unemployment-related benefits roughly doubling, something like that. So quite a stark change there. And then various other inequalities. And then we can kind of, as I mentioned, we were kind of looking ahead to 2030. It's quite difficult. The long term feels like the end of the week at the moment, doesn't it? I can't believe it's still January. But we've got coronavirus going on. That's had quite a profound effect. The vaccines are now being rolled out, which is brilliant news, and a great international effort on their development, and great work being done across Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England to roll those out. But it feels like coronavirus is accelerating some previous shifts, like, for example, more remote working and is doing stuff on Zoom, for example. So what long-term effects will that have, and what does that mean for our learning and skills needs? We've got the new trading relationship with the EU, and obviously a particular context for Northern Ireland within that, actually potential for sort of best of both worlds or worst of both worlds, depending on how we collectively handle it. But clearly that's going to have very sharp implications. So how do we sort of manage that? And then those ongoing changes that we had anyway, like aging populations and demographic change. So there's a lot going on, and all of that means that learning and skills is more and more important. And hence we thought it was worth taking a look at this, seeing where we're heading for by 2030, and seeing how we could do better. So if we move on to the next slide. Again, I suspect I'm preaching to the converted here, so I won't spend too much time on this, and we'll kind of get onto the meat of the discussion, which is the results. But I think what we've tried to set out in the report is that there are very, very clear links between learning and skills and economic growth and social inclusion, and all of those outcomes there, and all of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. It's not that learning and skills is a sort of, silver bullet that can solve all problems, but I think it is a key part, or a golden thread, as we kind of phrase it, that should run through our responses to all of these challenges and all of the efforts that we're making to promote prosperity in the future. So there's loads of evidence in the report, and we hope that's helpful in persuading all the different parts of government and local government and others to really see why learning and skills matters to them. So that's kind of a bit of background why we're doing this, the sort of context. I'm going to pass across to David to take us through some of the results, and then I'll come back at the end just to talk about recommendations.
Hi, yeah, thanks. So I'm David Southgate. I'm an economic researcher at Learning and Work, and I'm just going to take you through a couple of the findings from the report. Next slide, please. So a core part of this research was providing comparisons between Northern Ireland's qualifications profile and the wider UK. This chart is broken down by 5 qualification groups, ranging from no qualifications through to level 4+. The light orange bar represents Northern Ireland in 2017. The dark orange represents the projections for Northern Ireland into 2030. The light blue is the UK in 2017, and the dark blue is the UK into 2030. The chart shows that Northern Ireland presently displays a substantial skills gap with the wider UK, with less people having higher level skills and more people having lower level skills. In 2017, 30.6% had below level 2 qualifications, including those with no qualifications, whilst 32% had qualifications at level 4 or above. Comparatively, in 2017, the UK had 25.5% below level 2 and 38.4% with level 4 or above. This skills gap is projected to continue into the following decade, with Northern Ireland's skills profile in 2030 being worse than the skills profile of the UK today. By 2030, almost a quarter of Northern Ireland, 24.5%, will still have below level 2 qualifications, whilst 36.4% will have qualifications at level 4 or above. The UK's 2030 figures are projected to be 21% below level 2 and 42.7% at level 4 or above. In many respects, Northern Ireland's skills profile in 2030 is expected to lag behind the UK's skills profile in 2017. Next slide, please. This chart displays the skills profile of Northern Ireland when compared to a range of OECD comparators. Northern Ireland's relative skills deficit, when compared to these international comparators, is most problematic at either end of the skills distribution, with it suffering from both an increased prevalence of low skills and a decreased prevalence of high skills. By 2030, the proportion of low-skilled people in Northern Ireland will position it 4th out of 17 OECD comparators for its prevalence of low skills. At the same time, it will rank 14th for the proportion of people who are highly skilled. When broken down into specific subject areas, Northern Ireland was lacking in numeracy skills slightly more than literacy skills, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on. Next slide, please. When more direct comparisons of the 2030 skills profile are made between the Republic of Ireland, OECD average, the UK, and Northern Ireland, the gaps in Northern Ireland's skills profile become even more pronounced. The Republic of Ireland ranks joint first amongst the OECD comparators for its proportion of people who are high skilled, and at the same time, joint last for the proportion who are low skilled. In comparison, Northern Ireland will position 4th out of 17 OECD comparators for its prevalence of low skills, and at the same time will rank 14th for the proportion of people who are highly skilled. Next slide, please. When broken down into specific subject areas, we see similar trends in Northern Ireland's literacy and numeracy development into 2030. Northern Ireland is projected to rank 5th out of 17 countries for the proportion of people with literacy at level 1 or below, and 12th for level 4 or 5. Projections to 2030 suggest a slower rate of improvement in literacy for Northern Ireland when compared to the overall OECD average. Next slide, please. In terms of numeracy skills, Northern Ireland is projected to be 2.3 percentage points higher than the OECD average for level 1 or below. At the same time, it will be 3.5 percentage points lower for level 4 or 5. Northern Ireland is predicted to worsen from having the 6th highest proportion of people with numeracy skills at or below level 1 to the 5th highest, and remain 12th for level 4 and 5 skills. And now I'll just pass back to Stephen just to run through the 3 core policy recommendations.
Great, thanks, David. Just two quick points, just to sort of reiterate on that. The first is that they're projections, not predictions. So they're projections based on if past trends continue, where would we all end up? So actually, where we end up in 2030 depends on the decisions we make now and over the next 10 years. So part of what we're trying to do here is say, well, we think we ought to collectively look at how we can do better and improve things. I think that's an important point to make. The other point, I can see Mark Ravenall's asked a question about skills versus qualifications. So the literacy and numeracy figures that we went through there, they're based on the survey measure of those skills that takes place every now and again by the OECD. And then the other stuff, that was qualifications. And there's kind of I think Winston Churchill said that democracy is the worst system of government apart from all the others, and it's a bit like that with qualifications. They're the worst measure of learning and skills sometimes apart from everything else. So, but we do have internationally comparable data. It's difficult to make the international comparisons actually, but we have more comparable data on that. So this is not going to tell us all of the story, but it gives us a picture about where Northern Ireland's heading for in 2030 compared to other countries, and therefore a sense about where we might want to think about putting some priorities for change and for action. And that's where these 3 points really come out. I won't say too much on all of these because we are going to have a discussion on them now, but I think that these are 3 really key points for us in terms of setting that higher ambition for 2030. So guys, point 1 is we think we need a higher ambition for learning and skills in Northern Ireland, and someone's got to pay for that as well, and that's probably a mixture of individuals, employers, and the government. So can we set a higher ambition? Where would we put the focus and efforts within that? Secondly, this needs to be about learners, about individuals, and about communities, and about employers, and needs to be a set of clear progression routes rather than lots of things in isolation or duplication. And then thirdly, this isn't just about learning and skills. Actually, this is about how that fits into lots of other policy areas as well, lots of other areas of our lives. So I kind of mentioned that golden thread idea about learning and skills running through other areas like health and efforts to grow the economy and efforts to help communities to integrate and to be active and to work together. So I think that collaboration point is really critical for me as well. So as I say, I won't say too much about these because we're about to get onto the debate about them and the discussion. But I think, and you've got a little snippet there of what's coming next, I think. But I think the sort of key point for me is on those measures that we've picked out, there are going to be, on current trends, some real shortfalls for Northern Ireland compared to other countries and the rest of the UK. So we think there's a clear case for a higher ambition given the importance of learning and skills, and really interested in the discussion about, assuming that people buy that basic premise, how do we do that? How do we make that a reality? How can we deliver change? So Paul, I'll pass back across to you.
Okay, Stephen, David, thank you very much for the presentation. Really timely piece of research, as we are going to hear later from Graham Wilkinson about the upcoming skills strategy for Northern Ireland. But also on Monday of this week, we had the publication of the consultation around a new programme for government for Northern Ireland. And one of the new outcome measures is going to be around unleashing potential, or how do we maximize the potential of all our people. So a timely piece of research. We have had a number of questions. I'll take some of them, but one of the issues that certainly jumped out at me was that the research shows that Northern Ireland is improving in its skills profile. So I don't want to diminish the work and a lot of good work that is going on in Northern Ireland around improving skills. But the research shows that we're going to struggle to even match the UK's position today. And I think, interestingly, the Republic of Ireland is going to leapfrog both Northern Ireland and the UK on current predictions. So I wondered, Stephen, whether you wanted to say something about that and about the ongoing work that we're involved in, where we will have a 5-country event, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, and the Republic of Ireland on the 5th of March, where we can consider this further. So back to you, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I guess sort of two points. So one is, I think we're all in a global skills race, really. So the bar for getting into work for people, or for businesses succeeding, or for us being active in our communities, or for engaging with public services that are increasingly digital by default, that bar's kind of rising all the time. And so it's a bit like, so you're absolutely correct. There's lots of great stuff going on within Northern Ireland, and lots of improvements, you know, in that skills base projected forward. The problem is, it's like trying to run up a down escalator, if you like, because everyone else is improving as well. Every other country is improving as well. So you're kind of running to stand still, and you've got to sprint to try and catch up and get ahead. So I think it's very much not the case that you know, it's kind of all doom and gloom. There's lots of good stuff going on. There are improvements underway. They will feed through, and you kind of saw those improvements projected forward to 2030. It's just when you look at other countries improving, and in some cases further ahead to start with, we need to sprint a bit faster. So I think that's a really important point. And then the second point is about, actually, most countries and most places that you go to are facing the same sort of challenges. So I think learning from each other is really, really important, both in terms of the challenges and how we tackle them. So, for example, there was a white paper on further education in England published by the UK government last week. There were similar debates going on in Wales and Scotland, and kind of loads of countries around the world. And sometimes, and I think it's really important that we kind of share some of those experiences and share some of those challenges. So that's part of the reason that a group of us set up a network for adult learning across borders, or snappily titled NALAB for short. We couldn't think of a better acronym that was suitable. And that's really about trying to find ways to share those experiences. So as you say, we've got that first sort of event going on the 5th of March, and further details on that will follow. But that's really about trying to share experiences across Scotland, Wales, England, Northern Ireland and Ireland. So please do watch out for that. And if anyone has other ideas for how we can share experience or ideas, we're kind of really up for that, because I think it's really important, and we can all learn from each other in terms of the challenges we face and how we make the most of the opportunities ahead too.
Thanks for that, Stephen. I hope that people do join us on the 5th of March. I'm a great believer in sharing practice and trying to understand what best practice looks like, and then how we can mainstream best practice, because I think we spend a lot of time reinventing similar wheels, and certainly I don't think we ever had the resources or the money to do that, but I think it's never been more the case that we need to clearly identify what best practice looks like, and then fund that and grow it to scale, and cut out the variation that we so often see and is wasteful of resources. Another question that has come up is around what I would call our traditional focus in Northern Ireland on the knowledge economy, and how the knowledge economy is the way to improve the skills base and improve the lot of our people in Northern Ireland. One of your slides very clearly shows that Germany, for example, Northern Ireland per head of population have more people being qualified at university degree level than Germany, but yet no one would deny that Germany is probably the best working economy in Western Europe. So is it right or wise for us to put all our eggs in that knowledge economy basket, or should we think about parity of esteem between vocational pathways and academic pathways, and promote and perhaps we talk about people who are left behind in Northern Ireland, and I often think many of those people who are left behind is because the knowledge economy just simply isn't for them. They would rather be a plumber or a plasterer or a bricklayer, or do something with their hands. So I wonder whether you have any reflections on that, Stephen.
Yeah, so I think So a couple of things. So I guess there's a point about where's our growth and prosperity and jobs and employment going to come from, and people get very excited about like coding and sort of loads of flash stuff, and we kind of definitely need that, but actually there's more to life than coding, for example, just to pick on that. So I remember for my sins having in a previous job to read each of the economic development strategies of the regions in England, and every single one of them wanted a biotech cluster, and not all of them were going to have a biotech cluster. So one thing I think is really important is so I'm on the Greater Manchester Employment and Skills Advisory Panel, and one part of their industrial strategy is about foundation sectors, as they call it, and that's kind of health, social care, because we've got an aging population, and lots of other things like that, not just about the sort of very high-tech things that people sometimes focus on. So I think it's recognizing that the modern economies are complex, and that all of these roles have real value. I mean, you kind of look at what's happened during the coronavirus crisis. So we estimated that across the UK as a whole, so across the UK, there's about 11 million people that would count as key workers. So that's kind of health service workers, teachers, but also people working in supermarkets, delivery drivers. So I think we've got a slightly different concept probably now about what key workers are than perhaps we had a year ago, and actually learning and skills really matters for them as much as it does for somebody who's off to be a coder. So I think that's one point. The second point is about those international comparisons. So I said it's really important that we learn from each other and different countries, and that's definitely right. But also you can't just copy and paste bits of one country's system over. So you can't just say, oh, Germany's good at intermediate skills, we'll have that bit. Because part of the reason they're good at that is because of the way their school system's set up, and actually that has some negatives sometimes, in that you end up with a sort of very selection-based school system, which we can perhaps get onto another day, because I know that's very different in Northern Ireland as opposed to different bits of the UK. But also, that kind of then means you have fewer people going into higher education. So I think you can't pick out just one bit and say of a system and say, well, I'll have that bit, because everything is interlinked. So we need to be very careful about how we learn from other countries. And for me, it's more about general approaches and sort of general lessons, rather, or very specific bits of policy, rather than saying, well, we'll have that bit, but we don't want any of those bits, because sometimes you need those bits in order to get the bit that you want. So I think a bit of caution on that sort of cherry picking, to coin a phrase, from other countries' systems as well.
Okay, I have no doubt that these are issues that we will return to over the next hour and a bit, Stephen. But one of the other issues for me, I worked for a long time in health and social care and public health, and we have a massive problem of obesity, alcohol misuse, and in Northern Ireland, something like £10 out of every 100 that comes from Westminster is spent on the issues around alcohol misuse. But our commissioning processes don't seem to fit with what we need to do to turn that around. And if we want to do something about obesity or alcohol misuse, we need to do something about people's mindset, their behaviours, their attitudes, their mindsets, but probably more importantly, their ambition. And in my experience, learning is the only sustainable way to change those mindsets. So I just wondered whether, in your wider experience within the Learning and Work Institute, you have any research or evidence or useful thoughts for us in terms of how, by using learning, we can transform how we do health and social care, for example, and COVID, it seems to me, is a classic example. We know that people in poverty, we know people who have longer term health conditions, obesity, alcohol misuse, are the ones who are going to suffer most through COVID. So if there was ever a time to do it, perhaps it's now. So just reflect that one to you.
Yeah, so I mean, and this is kind of part of the point I was trying to make about learning being a golden thread that runs through lots of the big challenges and opportunities that we face as a society. And I think improving health and well-being has got to be right up there, given some of those challenges that you talked about, but also, you know, it's good news that we're all living longer, but it also means an aging society. So there's loads of great evidence, and some of it we've tried to sort of cite and bring across in the report about how learning can improve health and well-being, and lots of evidence from lots of different countries actually about social prescribing, for example, and building learning into health responses and getting GPs to prescribe, you know, learning as part of the sort of health response, depending obviously on the particular condition or challenge. And I guess the sort of example I often give from our own experience is working with Rochdale in Greater Manchester, excuse me, where we sort of worked with them to develop a community-based adult education programme that was focused on a set of core skills or capabilities that you need for life and work in the 21st century, one of which is health. And then co-designing the content of that with the people within the parts of Rochdale this programme was targeted on, rather than saying, well, please come along and you will now learn this. So it's much more collaboratively designed and sort of learner-led. And the outcome of that was not just that people, you know, went on the learning provision, came out the other end, liked it, thought they got something useful. There were also fewer attendances in A&E. More people signed up to dentists, lower levels of truancy, and a whole bunch of other outcomes, and cashable savings to public services. You know, there's kind of real savings in terms of those other public services. So in a time when public finances are constrained, feels a bit weird to say that, given how much we're rightly having to spend on the response to coronavirus, about a deficit of about 400 billion this year, I think. You know, but we need to make sure we're guardians of taxpayers' money. But investing in learning is a great way to get some of those other outcomes and to improve health and well-being, and that's good for people, but also it helps us save money in other public services and get maximum value for all of the taxpayer money that's going into all public services.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I know of the Rochdale model, and certainly if there was ever one of proven best practice that needs to be grown to scale, I think it's a shining example of how a more joined up, collaborative ecosystem is a term that regularly comes to me, approach actually delivers better public services, delivers cheaper public services, but also delivers public services that are more responsive to our people. I do have one or two more questions around who pays for or who should pay for skills development, but I think I'll leave those, if you don't mind, until we get into the question and answer session after the three asks or the three foundations we talk about. So if you're happy enough, just want to say a word of thanks to Stephen and to David Southgate from the Learning and Work Institute on everyone's behalf. Thanks for sharing the research findings. I think very timely and hitting all the right issues as we attempt to develop what could be the vehicle to a better life for all of us in Northern Ireland. So thanks again. I now want to turn to our learners. Research is important. It certainly should inform strategy and funding priorities, but we need to ensure that actions deliver positive change for those on the ground. And in my view, this is an example of best practice that needs to be funded and grown to scale. No surprise then, it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration led by Start 360, that you're going to hear more about in a moment or two. Belfast Met, the Executive Office within the Northern Ireland Assembly, and other partners, Housing Executive and others. I think it's learner-centred, and well, you can see, but I think it is already delivering transformational change. It's called the Futures Programme. So over to you to have a look at our short video.
As I have education completely, like taking a year out in uni, not doing any tech or anything, and I knew it would give me a step in the right direction.
I came to Futures because I wanted to develop my skills, and I hope to go to have the confidence to go to work at the end of it.
I don't really have many mates my own age, so decided to give this a go and get something positive out of it, but also meet some new people.
I was hoping to get a bit of direction, know where I actually wanted to go with my life, but I wasn't really sure.
At the beginning it was strange because I met new people and they weren't like all my friends would be similar. We all dress the same way, go to the same places, have the same beliefs, stuff like that. So when I came here, I was like, whoa, and I met some really people at the start that are so different than me that are really good friends of mine now.
Obviously, meeting new people and, with my story in particular, just getting to slowly let people know who I am and let people in has been a bit of a challenge, but I've just been very lucky with the group that we've had.
Anything that's we cover, that we do like an activity based on it first, and it really sort of pieces it all together just bit by bit.
Doing the group work where I learn a little bit more about different backgrounds, different types of people, obviously benefits me, like it enriches my knowledge and my ability to then understand everyone else around me and respect them for who they are, like no matter what.
My favourite bit was probably the residential. When I went there, I did things that I wouldn't usually do, and we all got to bond more, and we did like the campfire and stuff like that.
It's more true beyond the OCNs. You do so many different ones, but it's more about how people live their lives.
The OCNs are a big thing, but even especially for someone who doesn't have a lot of qualifications, it definitely adds to the CV.
Obviously with everyone being a safe space and everyone being so supportive, it was great. It allowed me to find myself, like figure out who I was.
And when I'm here, I feel relaxed, happy, because you don't think about the problem or something. Only you stay and smiling and talking with others is very good.
I've learned that setting points and places where you want to go is a pretty good place to start when it comes to actually deciding what you want to do.
It's helped me move past some obstacles, and really now I just feel like it's time to move on and do something positive.
Well, I have my head down, focus more, just doing what I'm doing, stop back and do.
I can definitely say I am more outgoing than I was before I started.
My confidence, I came here with basically none, and it's all the activities that I feel myself getting more confident.
You loved everything about it because it's encouraging and it brings you out of your shell, which it has done for me.
So I had first heard about the programme during lockdown, and I had heard about it on Facebook and decided that I should put the time that I usually would have spent revising and doing my GCSEs in a normal year to good use. During the course I got to meet a diverse group of people and got to know them. It helped me gain confidence whenever I was dealing with new people, and helped me improve my group work and communication skills. I also enjoyed the style of learning that we followed, being given the independence to work on our own and do certain aspects of the course on our own but also being given the option of support whenever and if we needed it. I would say that now that I'm finished the Futures course, I not just have a better idea of what I want to do whenever I'm older, but I also have a better idea of how I'll get there, what I need to get there, the skills that I need to get there, and also how I need to progress in life, the workplace, and in school. To anyone who's considering doing the Futures course or any other OCN qualification course, I would say go for it. You'll meet great new people, you'll improve yourself as a person, you'll improve your qualifications, and most importantly of all, you'll have a lot of fun doing it.
Just a word of thanks to the learners, but also to the funders in relation to that programme. I think a lot of bravery shown all around. Obviously, in pre-COVID times, someday we will get back there, I have no doubt. But I hope that the video touched your heart in the way that it did mine. It certainly shows how confidence and competence are two sides of the same coin. I think it also shows how we define skills matters. It's not just about meeting employer skills imbalances, although that's very important because that's how we distribute wealth within the society, people's access to work. So that's really important. But it's also important for those who need a bit of support to get onto that first step of the ladder. And all of that's important for Northern Ireland PLC. I think the other message to me is a community still grappling with our tensions of the past, growing a community that recognises diversity and differences as an asset rather than a threat is a really important message in terms of education and learning as we go forward. I hope you've now voted in the first poll. We're going to close that now, and we'll move to the second poll shortly. But we now want to move to the expert panel. So if we can have the next slide, please. This is really going back to the three foundations for success. Foundations around promoting and funding a higher ambition for skills, promoting alignment or a better ecosystem around our education and skills provision within Northern Ireland, and promoting collaboration for change. So I'm going to take these one at a time and ask our panel to expand a bit on what we mean by each of the foundations, and maybe share with us what they think success would look like. So first contributor around promoting and funding a higher ambition is the Chief Executive of Start 360, who was involved in that Futures programme, Anne-Marie McClure. Anne-Marie, would you like to introduce yourself and comment on how promoting that higher ambition can deliver better for the people of Northern Ireland? Over to you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Paul. I'm Anne-Marie McClure, and I'm Chief Executive of Start 360. Start 360 is a regional voluntary organisation that provides support services to young people, adult offenders and families across Northern Ireland. We provide a range of services and interventions in the areas of health, justice and employability. Our mission is change starts here. We believe in the concept of change, and that can happen at any time, and that requires support and understanding. And our vision is every person stronger. We work on average with about 15,000 individuals per year across the age groups, and we have offices in the community and in the prison estate as well. I mean, this piece of research is so timely, as Paul has said. You know, we're looking at developing our new skills strategy. We're looking to a new programme for government. And of course, we are living in a pandemic, and that impact will undoubtedly affect those most disadvantaged and deprived in Northern Ireland. So we definitely need to have a longer term view, and having forecast to 2030 assists us in thinking what that might look like, because as reported, it doesn't bode very well for Northern Ireland's future as a PLC, Northern Ireland's future when it compares itself even to Ireland and the UK. We all know the reality. Much data has been collected over the years, yet we don't seem to make the desired progress. We have numbers of initiatives which have been very positive, but yet they remain pilot or, as Paul has pointed out, not developed into mainstream. Inequalities have always been very stark in Northern Ireland, and as a result, opportunities are stymied, life chances are reduced for those living in deprived areas and are excluded, whether it's religion, age, gender, sexuality, all of those issues impact. And starkly so is the levels of literacy and numeracy. And we know when we look at our P7 cohorts that the level of literacy and numeracy are much lower there. Also, when we look at our population of young offenders, what is a common denominator is a low, very low level of literacy and numeracy. And then obviously, as we look across the economic and activity cohorts, again, the stark reality is that these groups also have issues. So when looking at promoting and funding a higher ambition, and it needs to be a higher ambition than what we currently have for Northern Ireland, well, the first thing that bounces out to all of us is collaboration and cooperation across all our departments, but primarily education, economy, health and justice. What we need to do is focus down on need. We recognise that resources are finite, so let's invest them in a way that does meet that need. Let's focus on literacy and numeracy. Let's focus on children and young people and the economically inactive. Our ambitious policies need to be cross-cutting. And we also need to measure our outcome right across departments in the same way, so that we know that we are making progress. Some of the ideas that we might need to look at from a policy agenda point of view is it right to exclude children and young people from school? And in doing so, where do they go? What happens to them? Another area would be looking at suspension within school. What is there for those young people, those children and young people, to support them? We need coherent progression pathways right through from cradle to grave, but most importantly, in initiatives that Start 360 and others have been involved in over the years would highlight there's a requirement for wraparound support, as those young people in the video highlighted. And also the other thing is the need and access for meaningful employment. We also need to look at collaboration and coordination across the sectors, across the public, the voluntary community and social enterprise sectors and the private sectors. We need to look and unlock the potential that we have across sectors as employers. A wonderful and very successful example of that is what the trusts across Northern Ireland. There's 5 different models in place at the moment, and Start 360 is involved with the Belfast Trust, and the outcomes for the leaving care population have been absolutely amazing. The trusts act as corporate parents and actually ring fence employment opportunities for those young people that they are caring for and have responsibility for. The other area I think that we should look at is what social value, and incorporating social value into every contract that is procured by government. Pilots are underway and have been underway, led by the Department of Finance. But how will this become the norm rather than pilot initiatives? And these are definitely things that we struggle with, is the pilot mentality. In 1992, I started adding to any presentations that I made about the work that I was involved in through Start 360, a very stark reminder that Ashton and Seymour in 1992 in their book, The New Public Health, highlighted it. And the sad thing, and I think it's something I want to finish here and reflect on, they would say, if you don't look at young people's needs and treat them as a priority, the consequences of a blighted generation of young people will last for at least 30 years. Well, that was 30 years ago. And when I reflect and I look at progress that is made for the cohorts of young people that are often treated as invisible and mostly forgotten, is that their outcomes for them have not improved at all. And if we look forward to the predictions of this research, we can see in the next 9 years that there is quite a considerable amount of work to be done. And I hope that this golden thread that we acknowledge in skills and learning is picked up, and we offer a legacy to those in Northern Ireland who most deserve it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anne-Marie, for those insightful comments. Let's try and make sure we don't have to wait another 30 years. Second foundation is that issue of alignment. Surely Northern Ireland is small and compact enough to have a single education and skills coherent ecosystem working in harmony. Jonathan, your thoughts on what the current issues or challenges are around that, and maybe what an effective ecosystem could look like. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Paul, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute this afternoon on what I think is a very important piece of research that tells us an awful lot of what might happen if we don't change trajectory. And I'm sure everybody this afternoon wants us to have a very successful Northern Ireland for everyone. So it's really timely, as has already been mentioned. I'm the Director of Curriculum at Belfast Met. I'll not speak a lot about the college. I'm sure most people are very aware of it. It's been in existence for 115 years. We deliver skills and programs of education from entry level to postgraduate level, and lots of different types of qualifications. So I suppose, thinking this through, how do we promote alignment? I suppose the first thing is for us to be honest and say that Northern Ireland, we have education sectors that are fairly discrete, that there are from time to time linkages between them, but quite often these are project based and they don't persist. And that means that somebody maybe in the community sector of education, or somebody in the school sector, the FE sector or the HE sector, that they're very much self-contained and they don't find out a lot about where progression may take them beyond perhaps the names of some courses and not an awful lot beyond that. So I think that the first thing that we need to do in Northern Ireland is that we have to ensure that we have got really clear pathways, as has been mentioned by Anne-Marie, from cradle to grave almost. We want to make sure that people, no matter what age they are, that the destination that they want to try and reach, they know how to get there. Now, the good thing is in Northern Ireland, there are lots of different pathways, and that over particularly the last number of years, the traditional route perhaps to getting into a career has been shifting in a number of sectors. But a lot of people out there won't know that, and they'll also not necessarily know how do they get onto that education ladder to progress. So one of the key things that we need to do is that all of the stakeholders within education, we need to really think through how do we ensure that the public know how education joins together and how do they go from where they're starting to where they need to get to. Now, there are green shoots of this happening. People will be aware of the 14 to 19 year curriculum project that is being undertaken at the moment by the Department for Education, the Department for the Economy. There's also other initiatives within my own sector, within the further education sector. In each college, there are curriculum hubs, and they exist to try and bring together educators, both in higher education, further education, and indeed school sector education, with employers to try and ensure that those linkages are much more apparent and that we can actually articulate to learners and parents and other stakeholders how education actually works in Northern Ireland. But those have only been in place for a few years, so there's a lot of work I think to be done in us actually giving clear pathways to learners. The second part, I suppose, that we need to work on is how do we actually align our qualification system better. And by that, I don't mean just that whenever you leave a school qualification and go on to a college qualification or go on to university, or if you're in community education, you go on to college, not just that the content is seen as equal value and also equally informed, but the way in which things are taught is more consistent across each of the phases of education. One of the things that in discussion with colleagues in universities and also then in schools that is very apparent is that quite often a shift in educational phase is quite a change also in how content is being delivered, how teachers teach. I think that needs to be looked at as well. If we want people, particularly returning to education, to have a seamless transition up to higher levels, then we need to make sure that we don't constantly have this very changing landscape that almost needs a full induction again into what learning and teaching and assessment is. So we need to think through how do we make sure that the distinct phases don't feel so distinct to the learner to enable that progression to take place. And I suppose in order to make this all work, I think in Northern Ireland we really do need to develop a learning culture, and it's mentioned in the research. That's something that certainly since the recession of 2008 has dissipated. To be honest, I think in my career, whenever I was in industry, we have a mixed picture. Some companies work very well with their employees and see professional development and educational development is very important. Other companies perhaps have less of that. But also then whenever we look at wider society, what value is there in wider society in terms of promoting education as being this ladder, not only to improve your own well-being, your own economic outlook, but also that of your community. So I think that we need to look at how do we develop ambition within our society, how do we develop opportunity, and how do we ensure that people are aware of the opportunities that are there to them. Now, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was the concept of build back better, which obviously the Parliament is looking at and the government at the moment. And this concept of a lifetime skills guarantee, I think is something that in Northern Ireland we really need to consider. And for those of you not as familiar with that, that's where the Prime Minister was talking about that adults without level 3 qualifications would be offered the opportunity to get a level 3 qualification up to at least level 3. And that would be provided through FE colleges in England. But it's the concept, I think, that is really important. What comes across in the research is that by 2030, we are going to have too many people, if we don't change trajectory, qualified at level 2 or below, and there's not going to be enough jobs for them. And therefore, not only do we want to encourage people back into education to make sure that there's a line of sight of where they want to get to, make sure that the qualifications and the way they're delivered is joined up far better, but we also want to make sure that people don't stop at level 1 or level 2, but they progress as far as they're able. And I think that needs a shift in our thinking as well. Level 2 in 2030 will not be where most people need to be. It's going to be level 3 and beyond. So a lot of challenges. I think there are things that are happening, Paul, within Northern Ireland, which show that we are looking at this, but certainly I think there's a lot to do in order for us to get the 2030 outcomes that we really want to see.
Thanks very much for that, Jonathan. You talk about the need for some honest conversations, and I think again, this is the time we need to have some of those honest conversations. Good engagement as a result of this event so far, and I think that's part of that conversation. The lifetime skills guarantee, I think, offers some real opportunities for us, and Kiva Archibald will probably want to say something later, but there's a micro inquiry tomorrow morning of the Economy Assembly Committee that some of us will be involved in, and I've no doubt that that's an issue that is going to come up. I think part of the that honest conversation also has to be about funding, frankly, and about where we put the funding. And the funding needs to go to where we get the best outcomes. And if that happens to be the voluntary and community sector, seems to me that's fine. If it needs to be the further education sector, fine, further education sector. But we have this disjointedness between the Department of Communities that fund the pre-employment work, then on to the Department of Economy that funds traditional skills work, and sitting behind all of that, we have the Department of Education. So there needs to be a bit more joined upness there. And before I go on to the third foundation, I've no doubt that those issues are ones we'll come back to, Jonathan. But I want to ask the Learning and Work Institute to share the results of the first poll, and then after that launch the second poll, and that can be ongoing while we take the next speaker. And the next speaker is going back to Stephen Evans. And the area is that issue that has come up in every presentation around promoting collaboration. And I just thought, Stephen, because of your extensive experience and expertise, not only across the UK, but more widely, do you want to say something more about what's happening in Rochdale or the metropolitan authorities or the citizens curriculum, or maybe some of the work in an earlier report that you and I were both involved in around the Healthy, Wealthy and Wise report, in a way that the evidence is there that we can work better, work smarter, and reduce costs to the public purse. So that issue of collaboration again, Stephen, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And I'm really pleased to see if people click on the polls tab, you can see the essential skills like literacy, numeracy and digital coming out top of the list of priorities, because I think it often gets a bit neglected, particularly and actually it's part of that sort of pathway up that's really critical. So personally very pleased about that. I'd have voted twice for that if I could, but the app only lets you vote once, I confess here. I found out. So I think collaboration. So look, I'll just keep this relatively brief. A, because I'm sure people have probably heard more than enough from me, and B, because I did talk a bit about this before. But I did just want to make a couple of points. So the first is I talked about that sort of collaboration and that golden thread in the context of health, but there's loads of other contexts as well. So, for example, you know, as we look to recover from the coronavirus crisis, how will learning play a role in helping people to get back to work? How do we build it into the benefit system and employment support? If we want businesses to grow and to make the most of the opportunities that are ahead, well, what role does skills and learning have within that? If we want to help those people people have talked about left behind places or left behind people, but if we want to engage people, well, what role can learning and skills play in that as well? So I think there's a kind of lots of evidence there, but also we have to kind of talk the language that people working in those different policy areas talk. So for example, when we've been doing work about trying to measure the impact of community learning on health and well-being, we've used some of the NHS's metrics on self-efficacy and depression and well-being and things like that, because that's what they're looking at, that's what they trust, that's what they're looking to improve. So I think kind of going to where the people we want to persuade are is really important. But also I kind of talked a lot really about sort of but policymakers and different policy areas, but I don't want to lose sight of the point that others have made. Actually, ultimately, this is about people and how do we persuade people to want to learn. So for the last quarter of a century or so, we've been running a survey of adults every year to see across the UK to see if they're participating in learning, and that's a broad definition of learning, so not a kind of formal long course. It could be something like learning how to use Zoom and not leave yourself on mute all the time, for example, which we're all still struggling with a bit. So it's a broad definition of learning. And what we find is that the biggest reason that people who are not taking part in learning give for not doing so is that they can't see why they would want to, or they can't see what the benefit would be, or they can't see why it's for them. So it feels to me that kind of culture of learning point that others have mentioned, and how do you persuade people, is really critical. And we did some focus groups with various groups in England to try and test out what would persuade people. And basically very few people were persuaded that they should take part in learning based on the economic evidence, i.e., you know, if you do this particular course, you're more likely to get a pay rise at work or whatever it happens to be. Actually, the things that resonated were about role models, so people like me doing it, about making friends, or about it's going to be really easy because you can fit it around work and home life. It's those sorts of things that persuaded people. So we shouldn't lose sight, I think, of the sort of persuasion of different areas of policy, but also about how we persuade people and how we build learning into those other services that people access. And I think the last thing I'd say is that actually the learner stories are really so powerful. So I've kind of seen that in the Q&A as we've gone through, that those videos really resonating with people and really inspiring. And so I think anything we can do to amplify learners' voices or their experience, or them talking about why they did it and the impact it had, that's got to help in persuading people as well. So I guess I kind of say there's loads of evidence, loads of examples about policymakers and how you build things into different policy areas, but also not losing sight about how we persuade people that learning can deliver what they want to get out of life and work as well, as really, really critical. And I'll pass back to you, Paul.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much for that, Stephen. Absolutely, there is loads of evidence as to how to do this, and I often think of the difference between things being complicated and things being complex. We overcomplicate this world. It's certainly very complex, but we know. We have good evidence of what works in terms of attracting non-traditional or second chance learners into learning. My experience in health and social care, porters were the best people to recruit more porters. Home helps, domestics were the best people to get more home helps and domestics involved in education and learning. I want to move on now to our policymakers and decision makers. But one of the questions that has come up, and I think I want to set it as part, one of the things for you to think about as well is, there's a lot of uncertainty around ESF funding and this new shared prosperity fund. But the voluntary and community sector are shining examples of how learning is used as a vehicle of transformation, even though learning is not their core function. It's not Action Mental Health's core function. Learning isn't. It's not the Now Group. It's not Start 360's core function, but it's what they use in terms of helping people to change their lives and ordinary people to do extraordinary things. So I wonder, building on what Jonathan and others have said, are there lessons there for us as to what we ask colleges and schools to measure? Surely the distance travelled for our learners, whether they start at gas mark 1 or gas mark 5, and how we progress them on, how we support them on. Surely that's as important as an exam-based approach. So I want to turn to the head of skills director of skills within the Department of the Economy. Lots of things to think about there, Graham. Lots of things I'm sure you've already thought about. So just would be interesting to get some of your reflections as part of this early conversation, because this conversation has to go on, where you see tensions, or if there are tensions, between that narrow or meeting employer skills imbalances and unleashing the talent of all our people, and how we get to the stage where we can have a coherent ecosystem across what's really a small part of the world. So over to you, Graham. Welcome your thoughts.
Thanks very much, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. Just before I begin, can I just thank OCN and the Learning Network for producing the report. I think it's an excellent piece of work, and certainly resonates with the work that we've been doing on the skills strategy. And if you haven't done so already, have a look at the OECD report that's on our website, but certainly does align very strongly with the work we've done to date on our skills strategy, which incidentally is out for consultation next month. So we're at a very timely to have this event today. Can I also say just one reflection? The little video that we've seen earlier on struck a chord with me, because we can do all of the research and we can produce all the papers that we like, but that really shed a light on the impact that we can have on people's lives. And I think that is a really powerful and strong message coming through there. So congratulations to everybody involved in that project in terms of what they're doing there. Excellent, excellent work. In terms of the report itself, maybe just to say a little bit, I was certainly delighted to see the key themes coming through in terms of the economic issues that we face here in Northern Ireland. And you've heard me, many of you I'm sure, say this before, the issue around too many in our society having low or no skills, poor performance in terms of productivity, as well as the very high incidence of economic inactivity that we have here in Northern Ireland. And those are the sorts of issues that have bedeviled us for decades. And I think it really does require a comprehensive, effective policy response backed by significant investment. Certainly, again, a theme or a thread, if you like, from what we discussed this afternoon is very much about that investment. I'll come back to that in a moment. We've also talked about COVID, and there's no doubt that over the last 10 months, we have seen a really significant change in our economy. We're seeing much more businesses move online and a real transformation of the workplace in terms of automation and digitization. And I think as a consequence of these really significant changes, that it's important or incumbent upon us to ensure that citizens are well equipped to deal with those changes. And that what that means is providing them with the right skills to be able to deal with the challenges that we are going to face in a post-COVID economy. And certainly in relation to our skills strategy, we will be focusing on those with low or no skills, as well as providing everyone with the digital skills that they will require. And again, whenever you see our consultation coming out, you'll see that bit around a policy priority in relation to the digital spine. I was also really pleased to see that sort of focus around lifelong learning. no matter what table you look at in terms of Northern Ireland and our achievements in relation to adult learning, we continue to languish along the bottom of that league table. And I was interested in the comments earlier on just about the rationale. Why is that? Why do we not value lifelong learning? I think here in Northern Ireland, part of that issue is around success was considered to get a qualification and get a job for life. That's me sorted. But I think we can all agree having a job for life is no longer a luxury that we can afford. And we all have to be prepared for the changes in our economy that lie ahead. I was also delighted to hear the point made around the skills imbalances. One of the pieces of research that we use, and I'm sure you're all aware of, is the skills barometer produced by the University of Ulster. And that's been a really useful policy tool for us to consider the sorts of interventions that we want to see in our new skills strategy. And certainly those technical skills at levels 3, 4, and 5, we have a real gap here. And that's something that we want to see being addressed as part of our skills strategy. Employers have undoubtedly changed the way that they recruit and how they upskill their staff. And we're seeing a real boom in terms of the apprenticeship programme. And we're seeing that as something that employers are very interested in. And we want to help them with that transition to new ways of developing their workforce. And so that's some of the key issues that I felt that resonated in terms of our skills strategy. If I just say a few more points around some of the key features within the skills strategy. And again, this has come across this afternoon in our discussion. One of the things that we want to see is we want our strategy to be inclusive. We don't want to see anybody left behind. This is the strategy about making provision for those graduates leaving university or going into high-end jobs. It's really important that everybody in our society can see themselves within our strategy, and that's something that we're very focused on. And I think just given what COVID has done to our economy, I think there's a real risk that there will be a large cohort within our society who could be left behind if there isn't that significant policy intervention that I talked about. Also responsive. Our economy is going to be changing so very, very quickly. And it's really important that we have that cohesion. And again, we've talked about that collaboration, that ecosystem that we want to see here in Northern Ireland. And you're absolutely right, Paul. We are a small enough place here to be able to create that ecosystem, that connection between our education providers with our employers. And that's something that we've already made steps to actually put in place. We have established a skills advisory group chaired by Jackie Henry of Deloitte and vice chaired by Mark Huddleston, who may be known to some of you. And around that table, we have all of the main industry representatives. We have education providers on that. And I think that has worked to good effect so far. And it's something that we want to try and build on to ensure that we are responsive to the needs of a very fast moving and changing economy. The other point that I just wanted to mention, make reference to, was the need to be focused on outcomes. I absolutely agree with the report in terms of what it says around outcomes. And it's not just about learning outcomes, it's actually about what the learning produces. Certainly from my perspective, health outcomes improve, better social inclusion. There's so many different aspects to what learning actually produces. And I think that's something that we want to make sure is reflected in the new programme for government. Great opportunity for us to actually engage with that draft programme for government and to make our voices heard as part of that process. And I think your report is a really useful tool to make sure that we can get our point across. And one of the things that we have been working on is that whole theme around more people in better jobs. And ultimately, I think that's something that we can all agree that we want to achieve through that investment in skills and learning. My final point that I would just like to make is around that investment that we've all talked about. And I have to say I was a little disappointed in terms of the draft budget in that there wasn't a dedicated ring fence fund for skills. And I think whenever you compare Northern Ireland to all parts of UK and indeed Ireland, it's something that we need to have that dedicated ring fence fund for skills. And Jonathan talked about the lifetime guarantee, and that's funded by England's and their skills fund that they have is a £2.5 billion investment. So I think it's something that is urgently needed here in order for us to make any progress. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a disinvestment in skills of around 25% over the last 10 years, as I say. And whenever you compare it to high-performing countries like Estonia, who have increased their investment by 68%, our neighbours in Ireland have increased their investment by 34%. It just shows the distance between ourselves and other countries in terms of investment. I think that's absolutely pivotal in terms of us improving the outcomes, is actually putting our investment into things that is going to make the biggest difference to the citizens here. So I will leave my comments there, and again, just to reinforce the point that I'm delighted with the report. I'm delighted that it resonates with a large number of the points that we're making in our new skills strategy. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Graham. And in OCN, and I'm sure in the Learning and Work Institute, to coin a phrase, I'm sure we all feel that we're in this together. So anything that we can do to help shape a more positive way forward, very happy to engage in that. Your point about learners is absolutely key. So join us at the OCN Learning Endeavour Awards, because every year I'm blown away by the learners, but also the wraparound support very often that is there for the learners, that has helped people, ordinary people, to do extraordinary things. And I know we can do so much better. The upcoming skills report, inclusive, responsive, outcomes focused, music to my ears, absolutely. Funding, key. And I suspect on the 5th of March, whenever we get together across the 5 countries, we'll be able to compare and contrast, not least the amount of money that's going into learning and skills in the Republic of Ireland, and the infrastructure that is there to support learning and skills, and how that over years, I would argue, in Northern Ireland has been dismantled in many ways to our disbenefit, and maybe that's a message we need to take forward. But I now want to turn to the chair of the Assembly Economy Committee, Kiva Archibald, and really delighted, Kiva, that you have been prepared to take the time out to be with us this afternoon and to share your thoughts, because I think the people who get this message best are the people who are closest to the ground. And our politicians, even though they are regularly lambasted in many ways, they do get the message about how learning matters, how learning is that enabler that can change people's lives. And the programme for government, flawed as it may be initially, it is a golden opportunity for us to get that funding, but also to build the ecosystem that's required to deliver change. So you're very welcome, Kiva. Thanks for joining us, and look forward to your contribution.
Thanks very much, Paul, and thanks for the invitation to participate in the launch today. I think this is a very important report, which adds to the ongoing and really important conversation around skills. Today, I'm speaking in my capacity as chair of the Economy Committee, and from the establishment of the committee back in January last year, skills was a priority area of work for the committee, and now more than ever that is the case. However, in a party capacity as well, before I took up the role as Sinn Féin economy spokesperson, I was our further and higher education and skills spokesperson. So it's an area of work that I'm very invested in, and which I personally view as a priority as well. In terms of the report that we're discussing today, and Graham mentioned this, it coincides really well with the work that is being undertaken in relation to the skills strategy, but also in relation to the work that the Economy Committee has already undertaken on skills. And you mentioned, Paul, as well about the micro-inquiry that the committee is doing tomorrow. In terms of how it aligns with the programme for government and the priorities of the department, obviously, as you mentioned, the programme for government is now out for consultation, or the draft programme for government, I should say. And in relation to that, there is the specific priority in there in relation to innovative and creative society, where people can fulfil their potential, and increasing the level of skills within our communities and driving down unemployment and raising productivity levels of our people through access and better employment is going to be a key part of that. The draft budget, as Graham mentioned, is currently out for consultation as well. And DFE have stated an aim in it to promote a competitive, sustainable and inclusive economy, which will be achieved through investment in 4 things. And the first one of those mentioned is skills. And skills programs, apprenticeships, other programs are going to be really key to the recovery beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. I mentioned the skills micro-inquiry that the committee has undertaken. We've also undertaken a couple of other micro-inquiries where we're doing these mini inquiries to support and feed into the work that the department is doing. So we've done one around the energy strategy, and we've done one around the kind of macroeconomic outlook for the economic recovery. And both of those highlighted the need for raising skills levels. The energy strategy in particular looked at the Green New Deal model about skilling people to undertake jobs and leading technologies to support that. The macroeconomic outlook inquiry highlighted that the COVID recovery and raising the levels of prosperity in our communities is going to be dependent on reducing the numbers of people who leave schools without qualifications, and supporting people to undertake that continuous professional development and to really develop that culture of lifelong learning that we've heard a number of other speakers speak about. Both inquiries illustrated the potential of green and new technologies, digital technology, creative industry technologies, and the need to develop skills to support that, to widen out the economic benefits of innovation. In relation to the findings of the report, in some ways they're quite stark, and they're also familiar, and I suppose stark because they are familiar to us. The recommendations also reflect those of the OECD report from last year. On the 3 priorities and foundations that have been discussed, I think they're important things that we need to incorporate into the new skills strategy and other strategies that are currently being developed. Stephen outlined in his remarks about how we've been lagging behind economically, low levels of productivity, the lowest GDP, less disposable income. Skills development, along with tackling low pay and precarious work, are going to be key to addressing those things. And if we look at the pandemic and how we have seen things over the past year, we've seen it really exacerbate inequalities in some respects, and there needs to be an increased focus on addressing inequalities and tackling poverty. And you mentioned, Paul, in your own remarks about how we have made progress, and I think it is important that we do recognise progress where it has been made. And those examples of where there have been best practice and where we have seen projects and pilots, as Anne-Marie mentioned, that have been really successful, we do need to be looking at how we can mainstream some of that best practice. And we do need to see that ambition to support that culture of lifelong learning. And Anne-Marie mentioned also about directing resources on the basis of need. And I think that is something that is important. In terms of the pathways and progression, I think that having the opportunity for all learners, no matter what stage of their education or career or what type of qualification that they have, that there are programs that are accessible and that people can tap into at different stages of their life. I think that's something that's really important. And again, it's going to be really important in a post-COVID context when we're looking at the economic recovery, that people have those opportunities to reskill and to upskill. And the department, over the course of the past number of months, in collaborations with the universities and colleges, have put in place a number of programs to support that type of reskilling. And I think that's something that we can look at developing and supporting further programs. And then that brings me, I suppose, to the point around the partnership working and having that real collaborative approach between government and academia and business and community, because there are experiences from across all of those various sectors which, bringing them all together, will deliver better outcomes. And we need to ensure that there is a framework there for that partnership working, and one that supports and develops that type of partnership working. DFE obviously leads on skills and is developing the new strategy, which, as Graham mentioned, is going out to consultations shortly. But as I've already said, and I suppose as this report highlights and as other speakers have highlighted, skills underpin so many other areas. So it's really important that there is that cross-departmental approach to skills development, and also that we have public participation and buy-in in terms of the development of that strategy. So I think it's, it's a good thing that that's going out to consultation shortly, and I think it is really important that people have the opportunity to feed into that. And as others have mentioned, the opportunity for the learner voice and experience to be heard is really important, and to incorporate that into the development of the new strategy. And where there are community approaches that have been successful, as well as those in the more formal setting, I think it's important that we develop and encourage that as part of that culture of lifelong learning, because learning has to be accessible. It has to be what people want and what they need and what suits them best. And it is important that we hear those experiences and we try to incorporate that as much as possible into the development of the new strategy. So I guess that's maybe where I leave it for now, Paul. I think this has been a really, really useful event, and I'm really looking forward to the ongoing discussion around this, and the opportunity to continue to engage both through the committee and just in this conversation more generally. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kiva. Yeah, certainly many challenges, but thanks for that insightful contribution. I've worked with you for a few years now around this agenda, but not only you. I think Mervyn Story's also signed in this afternoon, and Claire Sugden, as another member of the Skills Committee, have also been very supportive in our approach. So I think it's really helpful that we have cross-party, cross-community support in relation to taking this agenda forward. I certainly think the conversations, we need to continue them, and we need to invite people who traditionally aren't around the table. And maybe that's a challenge, Graham, to your group within the skills sector. Are you truly representative in that skills group around learners and around those who are most distanced from learning? But I think we need to have more conversations, and we need to have conversations with people who traditionally are outside the room rather than being inside the room. Before we go on to questions, I'm going to ask for the results of the second poll and ask that the third poll be started. And while that's happening, we'll make a move to the question and answer session that will involve our three people in the expert panel, but also Graham and Kiva. Right, okay. What should be the priority for improving skills for growth and social inclusion? Pick two. First one, agreeing a long-term lifelong learning strategy. 62%. Good. Secondly, 45% saying increasing investment. So those are the top two. Working with employers are important. Building learning into health and other public services important. Promoting learning important. But the top two, perhaps no surprise, around agreeing a long-term lifelong learning strategy. I think there are real challenges as to what that means and what it looks like. And again, maybe there's some opportunities to get examples from elsewhere as to what a good lifelong learning strategy would look like, how we could operationalize it, and how we could, at the same time, develop better, develop more clever, and develop at less cost to the public purse. And I have no doubt that is doable, not beyond our capabilities. So the third poll will open now, and it's around the 2020 adult participation in learning survey showed that 34% of adults in Northern Ireland have not taken part in learning since leaving full-time education, compared to 18% in England. How should we incentivise those traditionally left behind to get back into learning? Please pick 2. And your options are up there. Run a TV and media campaign, publicly fund return to learn partnership initiatives, fund employer skills need linked benefits to training, provide training credits for learners. So you can pick 2, and we'll get the results of that before we finish this question and answer session. So please be quick. The questions then. One of the questions that came up early on was who should pay for the development of individual skills? So I want to throw that one out. I'm not sure who, or if I can see who wants to volunteer to answer it, but I suspect there will not be too many volunteers. Jonathan, I'll bounce that one on you. Who should pay for skills development?
Thanks very much, Paul, for the question. It is a good question. I think it's going to be a mixed economy in terms of who pays. There are people who currently are in employment, and just as citizens, we have individual responsibility to make sure that our own skills are being updated, and certainly then employers can support that as well. So I think there is some individual responsibility for those who are in that situation. There's certainly a responsibility, I think, with employers to make sure that their workforce is continually being upskilled, so that they're not able only to do their current role, but also then any future roles. And I think that in Northern Ireland we are weaker on that. I think the evidence is that we don't spend as much as we should be in training environments like that. When it comes to I suppose lifelong learning, and Graham's already mentioned this, I do think that it's a hope of mine, certainly anyway, that our political leaders will grasp this level of this time. We've heard about the benefits of skills and learning, not just to individuals, but to communities. And we don't want to be left behind. In England, if there's going to be this guarantee, lifetime skills guarantee, then I think we should be wanting to follow that as best as we possibly can and as quickly as we possibly can. So I think it's not an easy answer, and not a simple answer. I think there is responsibility, obviously, in government. But one of the things I suppose that we also need to think about, and it's been alluded to by a few speakers, is that there actually are in Northern Ireland quite a few programmes. There are a number of opportunities, and I think we're not necessarily getting the messages out to communities, to others, that the opportunities are there. So within the last number of years, for instance, higher level apprenticeships have come on stream, and there's a certain demographic within Northern Ireland society who have picked up on this. But I just wonder, is it those who are more informed, those who are hearing professionally that this is another alternative route to higher education, and they're taking that on? Likewise, I think depending on the quality of the advice that you get perhaps at school, or the quality of advice you'll get from some other source, that could determine the path and opportunities that you're actually exposed to. So I do think that Northern Ireland, in terms of the quality of the provision and also the range of provision, that we do have opportunities there. So we're not starting, I think, behind in that sense. In fact, we lead the way, I think, in the UK in a number of programmes. But do we get the message out to the right people, and how do we improve with that? So I think that's part of the conversation as well, Paul.
Thanks for that, Jonathan. I mean, I think your point about not one size fits all is really important, and perhaps the funding needs to reflect learning need or learning past unfairness. The role of information, advice and guidance is key, not only in early years, but throughout life. And also people being able to see pathways or be supported to create their own pathway, really important. I wonder, Graham, would you like to comment on that issue about funding? Because I know one of the things that's been tossed about is this idea of individual learning accounts. I know they were abused 20 years ago when we last had a lifelong learning strategy. But in Scotland and in Wales, we have versions of individual learning accounts. And I have no doubt that we could construct something in Northern Ireland that would work for Northern Ireland without it being abused. So over to you, Graham.
I'll make a few comments about that. It's a very open-ended question, who pays? If I can sort of distill that down into a number of different elements, I think there are individuals and there's companies and there's government in the mix here. I think from a company perspective, even if you look at the level of investment over the last 10 years, it has fallen very significantly as well. So there's a real need for a cultural change in the companies that we have here. Now, some of them get it, there's no doubt about that. But I think it's right across all areas. Actually, if you want to improve productivity, which is what I talked about at the very start of my presentation, the only way that you can really do that is actually investing in your people, providing them with the skills that they need. And I think the terminology is really important, getting away from cost or funding. It's about investment. This is and an investment has a return to it. So we need to actually start to get that into the narrative here in Northern Ireland in terms of what we're trying to achieve. I think from an individual's point of view, yes, you're right. I like the concept of individual learning accounts. Perhaps the last time it wasn't implemented correctly, but actually the concept, and right across Europe, all countries are now introducing individual learning accounts, and that's something that I think we require to implement here, particularly for those individuals from disadvantaged areas. I think it's important to say this as well, that whenever you look at the figures at a sort of Northern Ireland level, you're talking about 1 or 2 or 3% of a change, but actually if you go into specific areas, the disparity is very, very significant. So I would see the use of individual learning accounts as a way to actually target those disadvantaged areas, to incentivize individuals back into learning again. In terms of government, I think absolutely, and Jonathan talked about that policy commitment around it. Everyone in England who doesn't have a level 3 qualification, we should be looking at those types of policy interventions, because those individuals haven't had the benefit of the education system that others have had. So there is an inequality there in terms of actually what those individuals have benefited from. But again, coming back to, without money, we can do nothing. Without investment in government, we can do none of this thing. All it is talking about it and producing reports. So I do think from a policy perspective, there's a big challenge here for the executive, given the sort of reduction in funding, and the next financial year looks very bad. But it's about picking the sort of policy priorities, and those areas are going to give the biggest bang, the biggest value for money. And for me, it's about creating that ring fence fund for skills, allowing them the skills advisory group to be able to provide government with advice as to how best to invest that money to help the economy, to help individuals, and to actually improve our GVA and GDP. Particularly, the next 10 years are going to be really challenging. So we need to be doing the right things here and not be continuing on to do what we did in the past. So it requires a step change in policy and investment.
Thanks for that, Graham. I know Stephen wants to come in, but just before we leave that issue of funding, I would argue that it is not that we don't have enough money, it is that we don't spend it wisely or cleverly. How can we justify the competition and the duplication that we have within our education and skills world at a time whenever, 34% of adults say that they're not interested in coming back into learning? So yes, funding is key, but it's also about using the money we have more cleverly and in a more joined up way. And that means us moving out of the silos, quite frankly, the silos of government accountability and departmental responsibility, because all the things that Anne-Marie and Jonathan and Stephen talked about totally pivot on that concept of deep departments moving out of their funding and accountability silos and moving into an outcomes-based approach that funds what works. So sorry, Graham, I take the point about funding, but it's not always about more. It's very often about using better what we have. Stephen, I promise to bring you in. Sorry.
Just 2 very quick points. The first is, a few people have mentioned the lifetime skills guarantee in England, and so I just wanted to apply a bit of a health warning to that. It is a positive thing. It's good that people will be able to get a first level 3 shortly through that. I guess first of all, the adult education budget in England has been cut by 45% since 2010, and this probably restores maybe half those cuts. So I kind of, and it doesn't give adults over a particular age entitlements to level 2, or reverse the declines in participation in basic skills, which are free, but the take-up's fallen partly because of cuts to local government and other things like that. So I worry slightly that we're creating a ladder of opportunity, but the rungs only start halfway up, and a ladder's no good if it starts halfway up. So I'm kind of interested in that broader idea of a lifelong learning entitlement, which includes second level 3s if you need to retrain, which is not covered by the English scheme, and also thinks about how you get up and how you get on. So I know the Welsh government's been doing a bit of thinking about a lifelong learning entitlement, for example. So there may be other things to look at as well. So I think there's kind of the title Lifetime Skills Guarantee sounds brilliant, and then you kind of look at what it actually covers and you think, well, that's good, but what about the rest of it? So I just have a slight caveat on that particular example. And then just the second quick point was just to agree completely with something that Kiva said earlier, actually, about green skills and green industrial revolution, because it feels like there's a kind of risk story to say, well, if we don't improve things, then people will continue to be left out. But there's also a positive vision and a positive story to tell here about the opportunities and how we grab them for Northern Ireland to lead the way in lots of those green skills and green industries and the jobs of the future, and take advantage of those opportunities, and that will bring prosperity. So I think there's a kind of disadvantage point and people missing out at the moment, but there's great opportunities, but we need to grab them. And in order to grab those opportunities, as Kiva was saying, we need to join up learning and skills with energy strategy, with industrial strategy, and all the rest of it together. So I think let's tell the positive story of the opportunity as well as the risk story if we don't invest.
Thanks for that, Stephen. Really helpful. And your point about Wales, I know Mark Ravenhall, who we've worked with in Northern Ireland in the past, has certainly been doing some work in Wales, and I hope that, again, we can share that on the 5th of March. Let's learn from what's going on elsewhere. I'd like to ask for the results of the third poll. And while we get that, one of the questions we've got is, how can learners and potential learners have more power than at present in the development of new strategies, policies, and educational practices? So have a think about that while we get the results of the third poll. How should we incentivize those left behind? 74% publicly fund return to learn partnership initiatives. Great. Secondly, provide training credits, a bit like individual learning accounts, I suspect. Fund employer skills needs come very close third, and aligning employers' needs and our learners' needs is really important. Well, it's just bubbling about. There are differences between the two. Link benefits to training, 24% run a TV and media campaign, which doesn't really get a lot of traction. So publicly fund return to learn partnership initiative seems to be very popular. So we're running close to the end of our 2 hours. I just want to ask the panel to reflect on those couple of polls, to think about that question. How can learners and potential learners have more power than at present in the development of new strategies, policies, and educational practices? If you have any thoughts on that. And really, finally, any final thoughts from our panel in terms of what they've heard today, or how we should take all of this forward? Anybody want to volunteer?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, Paul. I think we mentioned culture a lot today, and I mean, I would imagine the public in general would think that Northern Ireland has, a really good education system. People do extremely well, and that it's only a minority that aren't accessing appropriate skills and learning. So I think we've got a big promotion job. We need to inform parents, we need to inform learners, you know, that that is not the case. And of course, this piece of research is highlighting that. Of course, employers too can access, in schools, we all have a responsibility, and that information is there, and that data has been collected over time. So it's really about, you know, learning from what we've done. Obviously, I mean, there has been progress and there has been very positive initiatives, but it's also then looking at those things that haven't worked and why. And I mean, every single learner has something to say about their experience and what they want for themselves moving forward. We know it's meaningful employment. We know, and it was Graham mentioned, you know, we need to put a framework in place. But that framework needs to be supportive, and it needs to ensure wraparound. I mean, from an employer's point of view, of course, they've got their staff as learners. I mean, as we've already discussed, you know, if you have the right people in the right job, you know, there will be improvement for all. But it's also those young people, those children that we know that have limited life chances because of the systems and structures that are currently in place. So it really is shining the light right across that. I mean, it is a massive piece of transformation, but we have to start somewhere. And that's why we need to really look at this investment and investing skills and learning strategy where the impact will have the biggest legacy, and for those that are being impacted as we speak. The fourth industrial revolution we're right in the middle of it, probably moving into the fifth. People that can't read or write or count cannot access, you know, the new digital environment. And the other thing about access to learning is it needs to be flexible. It needs to meet those needs, you know, and even up to higher level, it needs to be part-time courses. We have staff in part-time degrees who we are also supporting in level 2 and 3 literacy and numeracy essential skills. And then, of course, I mean, that's the same for those that are from deprivation or are socially excluded for whatever reason, meeting their needs and their barriers to moving in through skills and learning.
Thanks very much for that, Anne-Marie. Any final thoughts from other members of the panel? Certainly, I think Anne-Marie's challenges of transformation resonate, and providing a voice to the voiceless in this debate, I think is really important. I know from my experience in the health service, 4 out of every 10 staff in the health service are support staff, porters, domestics, home helps, ancillary workers. When they come into the workplace, there is a substantial education and training budget, staff training budget. You know how much they get ring-fenced for their needs? Certainly not 40%. It's more like 0.4%. Partly because they don't ask for it. Partly because learning is not something that's on their agenda or what has traditionally been defined as learning. So I think there's real challenges in that transformation. But certainly my work with those, the learning poor within the health service was when we energized them, when we supported them, that became transformational, not only for them, but for the health service. It allowed us to do things much more cleverly, much better, much cheaper, much more effectively. And surely that's what we're all about. So any final thoughts, or are you happy enough? Kiva, sorry, Kiva, you're right.
I'll keep it brief, Paul. I was just going to make a couple of points there around what you've just mentioned yourself, and picking up on some of the points that Anne-Marie made. In relation to that idea of lifelong learning, I think it really is important that we create an awareness of the opportunities of lifelong learning and how it can benefit people, and that there are no, there's no point in your life where you can't take up an opportunity to enter learning. And I think that is something that we need to make more available to people, and to give them the opportunities to be able to access things throughout their careers, and to have those chances to get into education at any point in their life. And I think if we look at where we are now, and without sounding like a cliche, we face huge challenges in response to the COVID pandemic and in terms of the economic recovery. But there are opportunities there that we need to be able to grasp as well. And now is the time to be looking at how we can invest in skills, and how that is going to underpin the economic recovery, and those new technologies that we might want to invest in, and those new the new, I suppose, areas of work, and to take the opportunities of the learning that we've had over the past year as well, in the ways that we work, and to do things smarter. That there are opportunities in learning and in skills development in that field as well. So I think that those are things that we can look on, and we do all know that there are massive challenges in terms of funding, but we can do things a bit smarter as well.
Thanks, Kiva, for that positivity. Stephen, you wanted to comment?
Well, it's just to say, but sort of building on that, really. I think it's fantastic that we've had, as well as a very illustrious panel of speakers, kind of over 200 people signed up for a discussion on learning and skills in Northern Ireland, and more than 70 questions and points raised in the discussion as well. So it kind of shows a real engagement and interest, and it feels like, with a strategy out for consultation soon, this is a real kind of moment in time, and a real sort of openness to sort of work on these things together. And if we can grasp that opportunity and set that vision and reimagine what learning looks like in the 21st century, and how we widen it out to others, and how we grasp the opportunities of the transition to a low carbon economy, for example, if we get commissioned to rewrite this report in 10 years time and I'm still there, it could look quite different. So we kind of have a real opportunity to grab, I think, and I hope we can do that together. And we're certainly keen to do that and to help in any way we can.
Thanks very much, Stephen. And on behalf of the 200 people, I was going to say 200 odd people, but 200 people who have joined us, I want to say a word of thanks to all the panel members, all the contributors. Certainly we look forward to that ongoing dialogue and those conversations. I think we can reimagine, I think we can do better, and I think our community deserves better, quite frankly. Before we close, I'm going to hand over to Martin Flynn, our Chief Executive of the Open College Network, because it really is important that strategy and research fits with real change for learners on the ground. So Martin's going to launch the 2021 OCNNI Learning Endeavour Awards. Martin, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Paul, and hello, everyone. I just wanted to really take this opportunity to share some details about the OCN Learning Endeavour Awards 2021, and really following on from the success of our Learner Awards event in 2020, we're going to launch our third annual Learning Awards ceremony, and it's going to take place on Wednesday, the 2nd of June. This year, we've added the additional category of advancing learning through innovation, and this new category will recognise the innovative ways in which training providers have used technology to make learning more engaging, and also whether that be through the use of remote learning or a blended learning model during the global pandemic. Finally, it goes without saying that the pandemic continues to disrupt every aspect of our lives. And I know how unsettling it's been for many learners throughout Northern Ireland during this period. So I would encourage all OCN approved centres to nominate their learners for an award this year, because it is the perfect opportunity to not only promote your organisation, but most importantly, to celebrate the achievements of your students and end the academic year on a really positive note, because I'm sure, like many of you, we all need a wee bit of cheering up at the moment. And Paul, just the end, I would like to thank you for chairing today's event, and also thank all of our contributors and our panel experts. I'm sure everybody will agree it's been a really worthwhile, informative and fantastic webinar. So thank you, and back to you, Paul.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. The slide is on the screen now, setting out the Learning Endeavour Awards opening applications on the 9th of February, closing on the 5th of March. I don't want to delay things any longer. I want to, on your behalf, thanks to all the contributors and the participants, the Learning and Work Institute, Open College Network speakers, and you as attendees. The full research report is now available on both the Learning and Work Institute and the OCN websites. Links to the report, slides, resources, follow-up and the recording of this afternoon's event will be included in a follow-up communication with you all. And just to mention that we do have that opportunity to compare and contrast a 5-country approach on the 5th of March and see what we can learn for them. Finally, word of thanks, but also the challenge to build the alliances to ensure that learning and skills become that golden thread running through all public policy and funding in a way that delivers a better life for all in Northern Ireland. That's our joint challenge. We're all in it together. Thanks very much for joining us, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.